So it's 2018. A common issue to people right now is whether or not you should invest in the Apple ecosystem. It's very controversial. It's like politics, but I'm here today to explain to you my opinions on whether I think you should invest in Apple. Now, as of right now in 2018, Apple just actually released the Apple HomePod, newest smart speaker to compete with the Google Home and the Amazon Alexa. And so far, the reviews have been pretty good. The speaker itself is, from what I've heard, phenomenal. It's got 7 tweeters, it's got a huge subwoofer, it's great for sound quality. But then, it's a smart speaker. So wouldn't you think it would have smart features? I can tell you what I've heard from the internet. And the internet is saying that Siri on the Apple HomePod is awful. On the side, you have Google Assistant, but they have Amazon Alexa. Now, there's really not many differences between Google Assistant and Amazon Alexa, in my opinion, as of right now. Google Assistant is made by Google, Alexa is made by Amazon. They're both pretty smart. They can answer pretty much any question you possibly can ask them. And something else I just heard in a video earlier was that Siri doesn't actually use the web on the Apple HomePod. So you couldn't ask it something like, what is the average size of a cat? Siri can't do that on the Apple HomePod. I think it's more a software problem, which I think is something Apple will get to in the future, but Google and Amazon right now are dominating in assistance. That's fact. I'm sorry, but that's fact. Apple, I need to tell you something, Siri sucks. It is the worst virtual assistant you can use right now. Microsoft's Cortana is better than Siri is. Assistant lets you do a lot of things. It actually understands what you're saying. You can understand like English, like just speaking to it almost like you'd speak to another person, like me speaking to a friend. Siri, I find you have to be very specific in how you word questions. Like I said, it can't do as much. It really can't. It's not as smart. It's not understandable. The Apple HomePod can't differentiate between who's asking. I don't think Alexa can either as of right now, but I know Google Assistant definitely can, at least on the Google Home Max. It's not, anybody could read off your text message on the Apple HomePod. So we have specific speakers in the speaker itself that listen for your voice and can tell what you're saying and who it is. It has the technology to differentiate, so I don't know if that's something Apple has to add in software. But I'm just gonna, that's the first part of this video. Assistants, Siri sucks. Now, when it comes to iOS devices, what's my opinion right now? Well, it wasn't as common before, but in the past decade or so, smart devices have definitely gotten a lot better. I don't think it was any question back in the 90s when Apple was creating the iMacs. Actually, not even iMacs at that point, but just the Macintosh computers, of whether they were slowing them down. I don't think. I'm very disappointed to say that Apple was found to be slowing down devices based on battery health. Now, their argument for it is that it'll keep your phone lasting longer because instead of demanding too much from the battery and having the phone crash, your phone would just shut down or something, or the phone's performance would be throttled so that it couldn't take too much power and crash your phone. Which sounds great. But Apple should have at least told its users, one, that they were going to do this, because when you're slowing down a device, you know how big of a deal that is? And my phone is, what, a year old now? A year and a couple months old? Now, my device in specific is not being slowed down. I have 97% battery health. I'm actually pretty good at the battery on my phone. I only charge it when it needs to be charged for the most part, unless it's an emergency. So it doesn't matter in that aspect. But the fact that Apple knows that their devices already need to start being throttled a year later really makes you question about how they feel about their customers and whether they're just pawns in their game of making money, or whether they actually care about how long the device is going to last, or whether the user is going to get their money out of it. Like, honestly, at least expecting 2 to 3 years out of it. Which, in their defense, they've been supporting the iPhone 5S. since 2012. Because at least Apple does stuff like that, unlike Google, where they might support like 2 major software updates, 2 major versions of Android, and then not support it. Which brings me to my thought of capitalism and how it kind of really does bother me in the sense that companies don't really care about their customers anymore, and they care about money. Apple is my biggest example because at least people like Google don't really seem to do it as much. Google actually tries to seem to do more for the public with things like Google Docs, where Google Docs, I have mixed opinions about it too, because Google Docs is actually funded by selling your information online. Like when you go on Google and you're browsing, that information is being sent to Google or other companies, and they're selling that information to other data centers, and that's what funds Google Docs. So you can have your opinion on that. So I mean, there's that. But, so at least Google does things like that, and at least Apple supports their devices' software for a while. But, when it comes down to their devices, what do I think of them? Well, to me, an Android phone or a Google phone seems like the kind of phone for a person who knows that they're going to be a power user at this point. iOS is so simplistic. That's my problem with iOS, is the fact that it's so simplistic. And macOS as well. macOS, it's better, but it's still too dumbed down with it. But Apple really needs to work on how simplistic their OS is too. Because I feel like, but for someone like me who understands a lot about technology and how it works, it really does bother me when companies do things like this where they dumb it down. Like, if I know how to do something, I want to be able to just do it. Like iOS, for example, they could very easily code in customizability like Android has, keeping your app on any part of the screen without it having to be tethered to a grid, or having any kind of color theme on it, like at least having a dark theme, which Apple still has yet to do. I don't know how they don't have a dark theme on their phone yet. Or putting on just themes in general. Or wallpapers that move in the background without 3D touch. Like, Google's been doing it. Apple still doesn't. So, that's a negative against Apple in my opinion, too. Because iOS 10 and iOS 11 were both supposed to be like these major upgrades to the operating system that were going to add so many new features. In 11, we got Apple Pay. And you could send money over iMessage. We got a new control center, which is one of the things I actually do really like about iOS 11. But there isn't even much customizability about the control center. You can add more shortcuts to things, like in settings and stuff, but you can't customize where on the control center screen it is. It's like you add it, and it's stuck on that place in the grid. You can't even move it around like you can move around apps. Their camera app, you can change camera settings in settings, like changing like whether you're recording at 4K 30 or 1080p 60 or now 4K 60 on the iPhone 10, the iPhone 8 Plus. But like, why can't you just do it in the app? Once again, something you can do on Android. Of course, leave it to Apple to make you have to go into the settings app when you should just be able to do it in the camera app. Universability. Google Chrome OS, Chromium is the open source code, is what runs Google Chrome and Android and Chrome OS on a Chromebook, which is something else that Google does that Apple doesn't, in the sense that they can sell products that are cheap but still work for the everyday user. That Apple sells only premium products, which they only did one thing in the past couple years, in my opinion, that was somewhat tethered towards people who didn't have as much money. And that was the iPad that came out last year. It still was thick, and the screen wasn't as high quality as something like my 9.7-inch iPad Pro from 2 years ago. But, like, it was cheaper. It's actually affordable. It's one of the only good things they've really done for, like, affordable products in the past couple years. My Apple Watch Series 3. This is probably one of my favorite things I've ever invested money in, but it's also something I've also really regretted investing money in. It's amazing for me in my running, because, in my opinion, it's probably the best fitness watch you can get for fitness, and just a smartwatch for fitness in general, because it does so much with the fitness part of tracking your heart rate and your average pace when you're running, and what was your max heart rate, what was your minimum heart rate, how long did you run for, what was the distance. It actually even shows you a map of where you ran because it has the GPS in it. It has cellular. I can call people on my watch. Something that we probably never could even dreamed of a couple years ago that I can now do. But I paid $500 for this. Which, it's not even just Apple that makes it expensive. Samsung's Gear S3 or whatever it is, I mean, that thing's probably like, what, I think $300 too or whatever for the cellular and Bluetooth model. Or Bluetooth, I don't know. But it needs to be made more affordable. As much as I love this technology, I don't think it's worth $500. Why is this, that is nearly nowhere near as powerful as my iPhone, more than half the cost of my iPhone, as much as my phone? And may I remind you, you need to be tethered to your iPhone to be able to do much with this watch. So, if you want to buy an Apple Watch, I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I think the Apple Watch is probably one of the best products Apple's ever created. It's only for people who can really afford it. And the only people who can really afford it are people that have a lot of money. And not everybody in today's society has a lot of money. But Apple takes advantage of it. They milk everything out way too much. Now, Google doesn't have a smartwatch, okay? Samsung does, Google doesn't, so I can't say their argument for it. This is just one of my gripes against Apple for it.